Hi, everybody. Welcome to Niche, Queer Printmakers in Dialogue. My name is Veronica Ceci. I am on ancestral Tonkawa lands, currently known as Austin, Texas. I've been making prints for more than half of my life. And I will be your moderator today. We have just 1 hour today together, and our goal with that time is to have a lively conversation based on lived experience about inhabiting the dual niche identities of queerness and printmaker. This event is live, so please be patient with any real-time bumps in the road. I am curious as to the makeup of our audience. If you feel comfortable sharing in the chat what identities you affirm, I'd really love to hear from you. We will have a time for questions and answers at the end, but feel free to type them into the chat as they come up. I'm going to take a moment to introduce all of our panelists. I'm so excited to hear from all y'all. Panelists, if you could just give a little wave when I say your name so that people have the visual reference for who is who. And we'll go in alphabetical order, even though the alphabet is an interesting hierarchy to unpack at a different time. Starting with Vanessa Adams. Vanessa is originally from New Orleans and currently based in Pittsburgh. They are co-curator of the Queer Ecology Hanky project and is currently organizing an exhibition of that collection that will be at the Women's Studio Workshop in upstate New York this summer. Moving on to MC Carey. MC is an activist and educator based out of Baltimore. Carey recently collaborated with GC2B in launching a capsule collection of wearable art for Black History Month. It's really beautiful. Y'all should check it out. We also have with us today Amy Cousins. Amy is an educator in Philadelphia who creates in a variety of media. She was recently awarded a 2021 Wind Fellowship from In Liquid and the Dina Wind Foundation for the Arts. Go, Amy. We have Reuben Castillo, who is based in Kansas City, Missouri, where he teaches at the Kansas City Art Institute and Johnson Community College. In addition to print, Ruben also makes work in drawing, installation, and video. And last but certainly not least, we have Mary Tremonte, who's an educator and DJ based in Pittsburgh. Mary is the other half of the Queer Ecology Hanky project, a member of Just Seeds Artists Cooperative, and Mary is moderating a panel at the Printed Matter Virtual Art Fair at the end of this month. It's called Community Supported Art and is part of the Friendly Fire programming on the 28th. We're all here, we're all queer, we're all printmakers, and we have a lot to say about it. Let's start with our first question. Where do your expressions of queerness and printmaking overlap? And let's start with Mary, since you were at the end of the introductions. I'd love to hear from you.
Thanks so much, Veronica. Really happy to be here and see everyone, other panelists in your squares. Yeah, I guess so. Everyone on this panel embodies like these dual identities of queer person and printmaker, but we also hold a lot of other identities. So I think about that when I think about that question. For me, I came into printmaking kind of through, I went to art school, but before that in high school, I got really into like zines and like DIY culture and Riot Girl and feminism, which is very queer adjacent and queer inclusive. And so that's kind of like my root of making artwork in multiple. And I really love that about printmaking, that these objects that you make can exist in more than one physical place at a time. And kind of for me, the root of making anything, be it a print or organizing a dance party, is making like space for connection. So I really see that as this intersection of queerness and printmaking, of making objects for us to connect to one another, to see like visibility and affinity. And I've been really into making like bandanas and also like badges, so kind of wearable artist multiples that let us signal and flag to one another in real life space. So these are all things I think about in that intersection of identities.
Fabulous, thank you for sharing. MC, I know you also recently made some wearable art. Do you have a similar or different take on the same question about overlapping identities?
Yeah, well, I definitely have a very similar upbringing. I first discovered printmaking kind of from like this radical, from the idea of like printmaking as like resistance and printmaking as like creating radical information sharing. And so I really got into printmaking that way, but I'm a self-taught printmaker. I didn't go to art school. I took 2 printmaking classes and really transitioned into printmaking as a tool for my own personal healing and own radical, like, you know, self-expression. But I really, you know, as a Black person, as a queer person, as a trans person, as a fat person, as a person with disabilities, I lie at a bunch of different intersections. And I think printmaking is really beautiful because it allows you to, you know, outside of like other forms of art, you're not as tactile. And I love how tactile it is. I feel like you're really you really are like shedding your blood, sweat, and tears when you're printmaking. Because if you don't slice your finger while you carve, at least once you're not a real printmaker. And I feel like that kind of relating back to like my queerness. I like it's kind of like a battle and a fight to be seen, a fight to kind of pull my identities in. And you know, printmaking allows me to really showcase my identity. It allows me to do that radical like information sharing and image sharing that I don't think a lot of other art forms allows for. And so making art that like screams Black fat bodies and queer disabled bodies and queer euphorias, you know, like is my favorite thing to do. And I think printmaking is a perfect tool and art form for expressing that for me. It's always been easier to carve something or do something that's very meticulous, as in all of the other forms of printmaking, though I am a block printer at the current moment, and really get my emotions out, all of the identity shit that I deal with, stuff that I deal with every day.
Say it, it's true.
Thank you.
Now, Amy, I know that your work deals with queer histories, which is another way of being visible in a way that has been a lot invisible. And how does that help you to express your own queerness through printmaking?
I mean, I feel like I can come at this at so many different angles. Recently, yeah, my kind of vehicle and mode of inspiration has been digging through archives and finding printed ephemera, a lot of handmade zines and flyers, queer dance party flyers. And I love finding that stuff. And then I think there's something about like the printed word that has this authority. And so in printmaking, I find it really fun to kind of queer that and to use that to, you know, kind of rewrite things or subvert those histories by taking control of the printed word and recontextualizing things. I also think a lot about printmaking as this interrogation of sameness and difference, you know, about the multiple. That was kind of my initial interest in printmaking, is this excitement about the multiple. And I still work with like a lot of repeat patterns. And ultimately I'm generally making like unique objects, but I also like love a varied edition. I think there's like something queer about the varied edition, you know? Yeah.
It's non-normative for sure. As a former master printer, varied editions like cause me a little pain, but but I respect it as being like a broader art form. And Vanessa, when we're talking about the printed word, I know you got some of your start doing flyers and t-shirts and that kind of DIY community building through print. So how does that overlap with your queerness printmaking, kind of expressing everything that way?
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of like what Mary was saying about, and also MC, about their start in print. Like I got super excited by print culture, show posters, making flyers for events, and wound up running a community print shop for 7 years with a bunch of queer people. And I think that those two sort of like DIY subcultures and print cultures just like feed each other. Because I think what's exciting to me about like being a queer person, non-binary person, and a printmaker is like exploring possibility. And there's just so much potential in thinking about the multiple and the varied edition, and like I make a whole bunch of prints. What do I want to do with them? They're not like a precious thing. I can transform them with wax. I can paint them. I can fold them into an object. The possibilities of what I can do with those and the avenues and the distribution points for that is really endless. And that potential is so exciting to me, and also just like mirrors my gender journey. Like I feel like, you know, whatever, I've been a queer person forever, but like how I've looked and experienced and felt in the world really changes and shifts. And I feel like that fluidity and that space for possibility is what's so exciting. And also, like, as a printmaker who invites other artists into the world to make things, like seeing what possibilities are out there, like curating shows, organizing zines, like all those things just allow me and all of us to see like what's possible, like what can we vision. And so, yeah, I think that's how they come together.
Fantastic. Ruben, I feel like your work, at least what I know of your work, takes sort of a different tactic, because you're more about intimacy and the kind of internal and what happens behind closed doors in terms of queerness and printmaking. So could you talk a little bit about the contrast of what you do to what other people have spoken to?
Yeah, I've always really seen printmaking as for me, the way it intersects with queerness is this, it's this very like alien thing, you know, in like typical art world media. Like it's not quite painting, it's not quite sculpture, it's not quite, you know, like this or that, it's not quite a drawing. Like it has all of these different components to it. And I think that inability to like place it into one specific like area, like really is to me like what queerness, how like printmaking, I guess, like embodies queerness. And so like in my work, I think a lot about like the actions and the kind of like intimate gestures and like world making that occurs when you're making a print. And this idea that, you know, you're taking these kind of like normative objects, you know, like everyone has access to paper, everyone has access to copper and the matrices and all the same tools, but you're sort of creating almost like this like artifacts, you know, of like action and like an ephemeral moment. You're freezing it and suspending it in time. And so that in essence, like I think about queering as a verb and queering as an action to make something strange. That's how it really sort of like intersects a lot with my work. So having these kind of like personal moments in my own life, like frozen in time, it's like a really beautiful like record to like reflect upon. And it's also like a way to then like make space for others to sort of discover and like really think about like, you know, what they're looking at and whatnot.
Excellent. I'm really intrigued by how all of these notions kind of work together but have their own individual spurs. And sort of on that same note, I'm interested to hear like specific examples, and I think I'm gonna ask maybe Vanessa to start as part of the Queer Ecology project, of how you have directly used printmaking to build queer community. And so Vanessa, if you wanna chime in on that, and then Mary, kind of, since y'all are working on it together, and then I'd love to hear also from the other panelists how you've done it in your own practice.
Yeah, so it's such an exciting part of this this panel. I think I was, when I started thinking about my roots in printmaking and building queer community, I think it sort of like goes back to sort of like my early days as a printmaker and zine culture. And I think like I got into prints and zine culture kind of at the same time, because I loved the idea that you could get artists who are really like established artists, and you could get people who are new to making art, and all these different stages to put something together and then have it be super accessible, have it be $8 and spread all over the country to teens and elders, and make something that just really has the capacity to create its own little world. And I think that's sort of what started me on the journey. And then Mary and I put together this project, which is the Queer Ecology Hanky project, and we got 90 artists to make multiples, to make hankies, thinking about the original hanky code and queer ecology. And in that space, I feel like just even inviting 90 artists together, like in dialogue with each other, created its own little kind of community. And then having a space in a gallery, but like a community-oriented gallery where we hosted dance parties, workshops, artist talks. I think we just had all these different avenues that people could get in. So I think like it was again that same thing where we had like established artists, new artists, biologists who were interested in art academics, punks, like getting all those people together around a common theme just really allows you to build a cool community, and then like get people in, like introverts or party people. There's different places for people to kind of like get together. Yeah, I'm sure Mary has a lot more thoughts, but yeah.
Yeah, Mary, feel free to add on.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that. Vanessa said a lot of what I think about this too. But yeah, just to piggyback on that, like having that space, like making a TQZ, a temporary queer zone, in the space of a queer friendly space, but really making that intentional space. You know, that was really special, especially as MC was noting, it was exactly a year ago that we opened the Queer Ecology Hanky project. And 4 out of the 5 people on this panel, Amy and MC, and Vanessa and myself, were all part of that project. So that's like resonating a lot in waves. But yeah, just having a lot of programming and just like a lot of different ways for people to come in and experience the work. That was really important to us. And Vanessa also mentioned zines and thinking of that word publication and how the word public is embedded in that, but thinking about it not as a general public, but as like a really specific public. I really feel like publication is sometimes interchangeable with print, or very like print adjacent. I think of it all as part of like print culture. Yeah, it really has that capacity for like building publics, and thinking of the word public and the word community is like potentially interchangeable in a way too. Just opening up portals of possibility for people to come together, and subject matter wise, queer ecology just like brings us all of these examples of possibilities of being through non-human species, right, through animals and plants and mycelia, in ways that they form community, in ways that are, you know, sometimes non-hierarchical and non-aggressive, and not based on dominance, but based on cooperation and interdependence and mutual aid, which are all values that a lot of queer people hold in building our community and in building our chosen families. And maybe I'll stop right there and put a period in there, because I'm sure other artists have a lot to say about this.
I am curious though, if I can just kind of add a question to the question. Since you brought a lot of non-artists into the print space, did y'all convert anybody? Like they were already queer, or they wouldn't have been asked, right? Did you get anyone into the print club as well who hadn't been there before?
Oh, so queer printmaker conversion therapy? You mean?
Let's not use that terminology. Please, let's not use that terminology.
We're reappropriating it, reclaiming it.
Okay, I can get behind that maybe.
The queer printmaker agenda.
Yeah.
Well, we did offer that, you know, we had a lot of layers of like ways to make the project accessible for people to participate at all different like levels of maybe where they're at in their art career identity as an artist or creator. For example, there was like no fee to apply to participate in it, or to participate. And then we also offered that we would screen print some people's hankies if they didn't have like the facilities or capacity to do that themselves. So we printed about 25 of the designs in the show, which was actually like a ton of labor, but then that it also enabled just people that might not have had that printmaking access to still participate. And
Sure.
Yeah, I hope it opened up some other portals. I do think, you know, some of the artists that participated didn't normally like work in printmaking, or tried new things, you know, with like natural dyes or like materiality, or even like in the subject matter of the print and how it interacted with the material of the print. There was like some space for experimentation that I think opened things up in new ways for some artists. Yeah, do you want to add something?
Can I jump in? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, MC. I was curious about your experience as a participant from that side of the project.
Yeah, well, I just want to say that Queer Ecology Hanky exhibit was the one, it really pushed me as an artist. I'd never really I'd done a couple of printmaking projects on fabric, but for that project, I experimented with natural dyeing. I experimented with a lot of different things, and it really, out of it also came another bigger queer printmaking community. I'm actually working with a group of printmakers who are a part of the zine in some capacities on as a part of the project on another zine, a mutual aid zine that's coming out sometime soon. But I really love printmaking's capacity to, you know, bring people to an art form that sometimes feels so inaccessible. As someone, I'm self-taught for the most part. I taught myself relief printmaking. I took classes in Ataglio printmaking and did etching on zinc and copper plates, and I loved it. But once I graduated college, you know, I studied political science and gender studies. I'm working in the violence prevention field. There's no access for me for an acid bath or an etching press. You know, I didn't have those tools at my disposal, and so relief printmaking, lino block carving really became a tool for me to explore and really dive into the real reason I became a printmaker, which is to merge, you know, art and healing. As someone who works in the gender-based violence field, I've loved every opportunity I've been able to bring printmaking into violence prevention, and that's been a really great tool to build community, whether it's with my survivors at work or with my community, being able to teach people and use such a hand. I keep saying tactical, but I don't think that's the right word, but
Tactile,
yes, a very
yes.
tactile like form of work. It's very meditative, and it's something that, you know, prints and stamps, like Vanessa was saying, like they're ever changing. Like, it's not expensive to do, it's really accessible. Like, you need if you don't have linoleum, you can get the pink rubber stuff. Like, you can get these materials. You can even print with a potato. Like, there's so much that you can do that I think printmaking is really accessible, and I think that queers it, because going back to what Ruben was saying about queering our understanding of art and printmaking is just making it more accessible, making it more less, at least for me, it's more important to make it less academic and more personable, because that's where its roots are in zine making and radical information sharing. And so for me, being a part of that queer ecology exhibit really, you know, pushed me as an artist with different techniques and skills, but it also gave me the opportunity to meet other printmakers who were not only interested in the intersections of queerness and flagging and printing, but also who were interested in mutual aid and transformative justice and radical harm reduction. And I think that's really, really powerful. Like, there's a
so powerful. Mm-hmm.
It's so powerful. And I want to thank Mary and Vanessa every day for inviting me, because it was such a great experience. And I'll stop talking now.
I don't know how many of our viewers have been watching the ballroom today, but they actually were making prints with cheese earlier this morning. So it really is a universally accessible medium. Now, Amy, you were also part of the Hanky project, is that correct? But you come from a somewhat more an academic background, if I can say, or am I wrong on that?
No, I think that's fair to say. I learned about the Queer Ecology Hanky project through Ginger that I met at a residency at Acre, and I was just starting to get excited about queer ecology and what nature has to teach us about being queer. So I was really excited to join that, and from that, blossomed these other relationships, no pun intended. So that when Ruben and I chaired a panel at the Mid-American Print Conference about history and archives, I thought, oh, like the Queer Ecology Hanky project would be so great to chime in on this. And then now here we are. So this has in itself been really fruitful community building, and, you know, still haven't met most of you face to face, but hopefully someday. But we've spent a lot of time together on Zoom.
This is true. Ruben, you weren't part of that project, so I'm interested to hear, like, from a different angle, how you've used printmaking to build queer community in your own practice.
Yeah, I mean, definitely thinking about like the everyday action, like that's something that's incredibly important. Like in graduate school, I kind of similarly had like a very academic like entry point into printmaking, but definitely thinking about after I graduated, and like same thing, like I didn't have access to like a press or like an acid bath to make like intaglio prints that I was making in undergrad. I started thinking about the way that, like, you know, those actions can be like translated into like other ways, you know, like what other ways you can make like, you know, different tiny like little marks and like intimate little moments on paper. So like thinking about those everyday actions then like inspired like a lot of my later work, and thinking about like what are the common gestures that can be performed, what are the things that people go through in their everyday life, and then of course thinking about print's history, really like at the center of like all artwork. I mean, print, and we've talked a lot about, you know, especially like Mary and Vanessa and MC, you know, we all talked about like the transformative nature that's part of print. Like it transformed painting, it transformed photography into video. It led the way, you know, to then create video and performance-based work. We really began to think about the accessibility of like publics and cultures and whatnot. And we've all kind of like been talking a little bit about that too. So that really began to inform like the way that I approached my work, and thinking too about like other people that I was reading about, like about the everyday, and you know what was sort of like always present, but like we didn't quite notice it. So then it kind of like spiraled away from printmaking, but still like it all, like for me, it started at that root of printmaking. So like if that can allow me to, you know, begin to like think bigger about the world, then like printmaking definitely is like super special in that case. And like that is something that I always like to, especially like in a classroom, because I'm an educator, like I love to tell that to my students and be like, look, it like it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's not just this little like thing you do in like a print room, you know, like it's like the world. And so hopefully like in getting my students to see that, like that's like meaningful action for me.
So we've talked a lot about the ways in which printmaking can be very broad and very large. I'd like to sort of move it to the micro level. And I'm curious, you know, printmaking is like a subset of things within art. And then there are subsets within printmaking, like MC has mentioned, that they mostly do relief printing. My specialty is lithography. I don't have access to that right now. But then being queer within printmaking is like a subset within a subset within a subset. So how does it feel? And I'm talking like just straight sort of emotion and experience. If you have any sort of outsider experiences that you're willing to share, to be in like such a tiny little corner of the known world and have that really individualistic specialty. And I'm gonna bring it back to Ruben this time, since you sat so patiently while we were talking before.
Oh, it's so funny. Like I hear this all the time in like higher ed, because like in higher ed, and other people like who are watching this like can maybe like attest to this, like printmaking is the one program that's like I hear is left and right going to be cut. I mean, like it's one of those things that's like constantly at risk, and so like we're always like afraid of like losing it. But then at like the same time, like when I communicate with my other like colleagues in painting, they're always like super jealous because like we can get our work like wherever we want, and it's just like, you know, like, yeah, like I was part of this portfolio exchange, and like now it's in like all these different museums and whatnot, or like it's in the hands of like more people than like, you know, your painting is. Not to like trash talk painters, but maybe to like, you know, rub it in a little bit. But you know, it's think like that is like really, that to me is like super important, and it makes me, it doesn't make me feel like I'm in this kind of like smaller thing. Like at first it may appear like I'm very like specialized and like narrowed down a little bit, but then like once I kind of think, you know, a little bit more about it, I'm just like, no way, this is like everything. I feel like even more connected, and I feel like less like, I guess, alone in like the little like art bubbles or whatever.
MC, I'd love to have you weigh on this, since you come from a very different background into the medium. So how does it feel for you to be part of this smaller identity group within the print world?
Well, I as an individual really lay at a bunch of intersections, and I've always been kind of the one person who's on the sidelines, who doesn't really fit into any group because I have other things that make me different. And so, you know, this is just kind of, it's on trend for me. It's on trend for me, but I think especially working with the project that I'm a part of now with GC2B, which is a Black trans-owned chest binder company and gender affirming company, to be chosen as one of their top 5 artists for this Black History Month time capsule collection. it's given me the opportunity to understand what it means, like, because I'm not printing on the actual fabric I'm using, which is different from me. I usually am printing everything. So I'm relying on them to block print or to screen print and or embroider the work onto this apparel. But you know, being able to be a part of something that's so explicitly for Black and other BIPOC, queer and trans people, that is made for us, by us, and is funded and supported for us, it feels really powerful. It feels like a lot is in my hands, and I have a lot of power, which, you know, as someone who lives at the intersections, you know, that isn't something that comes easily. Power isn't something that I have a lot of access to. And so I really love being able to, you know, interact with my community, interact with people who can understand expansiveness on a broad level, whether you're talking about an imagery that I'm carving or in the thought that I'm bringing from behind my pieces. Usually all of my work had to do with healing, had to do with identity, had to do with justice of some form or natural symbolism that relates back to my own healing. And so to be able to share bits and pieces of myself with another group who I know are also just searching to be found and to find community, I think is really special. And it doesn't make me feel like I'm in this tiny little niche, because the queer and the Black queer trans community is so full of love and so accepting. And, you know, I do struggle with the imposter syndrome and being around people who also struggle with imposter syndrome. So we all know we're worthy. Like, I don't know, it just feeds off of each other. It's an energy. And so like, I can't imagine myself being a printmaker without integrating my identities into it, without, you know, using those like experiences of pain, of trauma, of loss, of, you know, heartache or whatever it is to like feed my passion for creating. And it gives me an idea to be, it reminds me to be more authentic and not make something for the masses because it'll sell, even though I love money and money makes the world go round because we're in a capitalist system. I'm reminded that, you know, to be me, to be MC Carey, the one who runs FemPrints and who does this type of work, I need to be making for me and not for just something that will sell. And so it keeps me authentic, which I really appreciate. And that's what I hope to hold on to as I continue to hone in my practice and try different things. And, you know, remind myself like my audience is the audience that wants to know me and wants to feel connected and isn't an audience that just wants to buy things just to buy things. So it's
so true, so true. I'm hearing kind of themes so far that even though these are really like statistically smaller communities, because they're smaller, there's like a strength in that, like the membership is really tight with each other. Mary, would you agree with that sentiment, or do you have a kind of a different take?
I would say a yes and response. Yes, you know, that specificity can help for stronger community building, but also as MC notes, it is holding a bunch of different identities. You know, maybe there aren't that many people that you encounter that hold all of the same identities as you, but then it is expansive because then you're connected to all of these different identities and communities. And this is maybe tangential, but maybe not. But kind of in speaking about community and just printmaking in general, you know, people talking about access coming out of school and not having access to tools or equipment. Just thinking about the really important role of community print shops, which Vanessa mentioned earlier on. And I was involved with an artist-run printmaking studio here in Pittsburgh that I interned at when I was an undergrad, and then started volunteering at when I was out of school and needing access. It's called Artist Image Resource. It's here in Pittsburgh on the north side. And that space has opened up just like access for so many people, and really kind of changed the face of like gig posters and, you know, the potential for activists to print t-shirts or just like musicians to print their work. Just kind of has expanded like the capacity for print culture in Pittsburgh. And those spaces are so important. And Vanessa and I are both part of a collective art and workshop studio, and we kind of run the printmaking space within that studio. It's really printmaking really lends itself to kind of the imperative of like being in community and like working together and sharing equipment and resource. Yeah, and then the physicality of like what we make itself, the print the print culture, just also further lends itself to community and connecting with other people. And I don't know, like participating in like the printed matter art book fairs that Veronica mentioned, the virtual ones happening the last weekend of this month. That's like, there's so many kinds of people and kinds of printed matter that show up at those fairs, and there's like really specific niches within the fair. Like a friend of mine is always in this like queer row that she calls Vaseline Alley, within the print, within the zine tent of the fair. I, as part of Just Seeds, are always in Friendly Fire, which is an area that's focused on like artist activists collectives who make print work. So yeah, I guess I appreciate niche as kind of an overall theme for this this panel discussion, but it's actually more expansive than exclusive or potentially limiting.
So Vanessa, it was referred to your founding of a community print shop. Did that come out of the need for the community to print, or was it looking for community and then printing was a way to build that?
So sort of all of the above. Like I had just moved back to New Orleans, where I'm from, and I saw a flyer and it was like, do you want to build a community print shop? And my buddy Meg Turner was organizing a community print shop, and I went to that first meeting and I was like, fuck yeah, and hopped on board. And like I was a really excited novice printmaker, and I think like something I'm just noticing about all of us is that we're all educators, like whether we're educating at the college level or in like community settings or in like workshop settings, we're all educating. And in that, and I think there's just so much potential for connection in that place. And me and my friend Rachel Speck were teaching a teen workshop, screen printing flags at a school, and this like gifted art class. We needed somewhere to explore screens, so we started an education component to the community print shop. We were doing drop-in nights, and so it's like I just love all those ways for people to connect through learning and through sharing. And I think that's just something sort of like intrinsic to printmaking, at least in my experience, because it is so as MC was saying, like visceral, physical, and there's all these techniques. I find, at least in my experience, that printmakers are really willing to be like, this is how I do something. And something I appreciate on the internet is like, I sent a print someone and they were like, hey, how did you melt beeswax into that print? And I was like, cool, I'll make a video and I'll show you. Or like my partner puts up videos of how they make lino cuts. And I just feel like there's so much educating and education sharing about how we do things that it really helps everybody, at least helps me feel connected. Like I'm always like, oh, I feel like I'm connected to so many amazing printmakers who are doing like, maybe they're doing risograph, screen printing, but like, I feel like I'm like, oh, there's so much I can learn just from my fellows and from everybody around me. So yeah, but the community print shop was definitely like a formative place where I was able to learn from other people and also help other people learn, which is my favorite. So.
And Amy, as someone who works in a more formal educational setting, does your experience mirror that, or do you have sort of a different way of looking at it or a different background?
I mean, I think that the queer community and the printmaking community are both such gifts. And like folks have been saying, like there is such warmth and generosity, I think, across both of those communities. And printmaking is my background and it shapes a lot of the ways that I think, but the work that I'm making, you know, it's veers very far from the printmaking path in a lot of ways. And the printmaking community has always welcomed me with open arms regardless. You know, I've never made to feel that I'm not printmaker enough. And similarly, I've never made to feel that I'm not queer enough or not queer in the right ways. You know, we might like be doing some of that stuff in our own heads, but if I'm being honest, like it's never coming from these communities, which is such a beautiful thing.
I feel really similar like to that as well, like as like a mixed race person too. It's like where you're not like, because I'm like half white, half like Mexican, and so like, you know, you don't feel like brown enough even, or like white enough even sometimes. But yeah, same thing, like never in like this community. Like we're always bound by like that sense of discovery and magic that happens when the print is like, you know, like the magical reveal, right? Like students like flip their shit when it goes on, and they're just like, wow, this is so cool. And I'm like, yeah, like it is like magic. Like print is totally magic. And I think that sort of like, that's this like binding sort of force element that brings us all together. And it's like, it's my favorite thing, and it's super beautiful.
I totally agree. And that kind of brings me to another topic that we had on our list to perhaps discuss, which is the relationship between printmaking and gender identity. I know for me, printmaking is where I'm butch. I joke a lot with my partner about how butch I am, but like the amount of tools and stuff I have in this, right through this wall, and I'm sometimes the butchest person in the room and also wearing the most eye makeup. And so I would love to hear how the rest of the panel feels on that topic about the relationship from printmaking to gender, if there is one, if it expresses for you, or if it's just something completely separate. Anyone care to like jump in, have big feelings about it?
Can I jump in? Because
go for it, MC. Yes, absolutely.
I feel like as a queer, trans, non-binary person, like printmaking has been like the one place, as also as a mixed race person, I'm half Black, half white. I feel what Ruben was saying about not, you know, printmaking is, and what Amy was saying, it's so inclusive and so it inspires you to do different things and explore. And I think, but for me, for gender identity, like it is also where I feel the most butch. I am a very femme person. That's my brand, Femme Prints on Instagram. Don't really know how that plays out with my impending transness, but it's really a place where like I can feel powerful and in control, when a lot of the things that I do in my life I don't really feel like I have control over, just at the will of other people, at the will of the work, at the will of whatever is going on in this world. But you know, you get to experiment and play with printmaking, and also just like getting to use all of these big like tools, and it's like it's almost like an ancestral type of medium too. Like it goes back so many generations and years, and it's really powerful to like tap into some of like this historical you know, way of communicating, of showing art, of, you know, of all of that, right, of printmaking, and be able to explore, you know, what it means to be in control of something. Like you're in control of the carving, in control of the ink, how much pressure you put on the paper while you're printing it. And it just feels like, and you're using, for me, I'm using knives and I'm carving stuff. Like that is badass. And so it makes me feel like a printmaker daddy. And I'm on my Instagram with my leather harness and my collar and my new canvas leather apron, and I'm feeling like a bad bitch, and I love it. And I think that's something like printmaking, out of all of the mediums that I try, like I love textiles too, and I love working with that, but like printmaking gives me that feeling like I am in control. I am, yeah, studio daddy.
I also think about too, like gender fails, like kind of the, you know, to talk about queer publications, like gender fails, like incredible. You know, B. Oakley's work with that. And I think about the really kind of like, almost like totemic like statement that like goes behind all of that, you know, radical softness as a boundless form of resistance, right? Like we're dealing with material and things like that really talks about like the intersection of like printmaking and all other media, right? Like we're dealing with like sheets of metal, we're dealing with like Bavarian limestone, with wood, with linoleum, with paper, with cotton, with all of these things. And, you know, it's almost as if like really like the gender behind all of that is like a gender of like based on feeling, you know, of softness and hardness, and how those two can kind of like mesh together. I mean, even in like etching, which is like kind of my primary area, I mean, I'm dealing with, you know, soft, delicate, wet paper that has to be handled like so gently, and then at the same time like it's being laid over this like cold piece of metal that's been like incised into, and it's, there's like automatically like right within that like so many like sensations and feelings to me that's like, I almost think of like that notion of like radically breaking away from that binary, and like how those two can kind of just like merge and simultaneously exist together. I think it's really beautiful. So I think that's something I definitely think a lot about, especially in reaction with like MC, what you were saying.
Yeah, Veronica, when you sent out this question, I was thinking about it in metaphorical terms of like pushing boundaries of every medium. And then when you were saying that about feeling butch when you, with your tools, it just brought up so many other things. And I think I still need to find my perfect printmaking zaddy apron like MC has. I remember like when I was in college and getting into printmaking, my mom gave me some like frilly apron and I was just like, oh no, like this won't do. And there was definitely like, you know, I would love to do these like giant rainbow rolls and have this like massive litho roller. And it's like, I'm like 5 foot nothing. And, you know, would just be like, yeah. And like my entire torso is like on the glass slab. Right. So that's definitely a thing.
Mary, do you care to weigh in on this topic?
Well, I love the incongruity of wearing like a really frilly vintage apron while like getting it totally filthy while printing. But I'm also looking for my dream like tough apron. I will say the way my body has changed through printmaking, just like my arm muscles are like really developed compared to the rest of my body, and like a lot of vintage clothes don't fit me. Like women's vintage clothes, they're just like made for a smaller body. But yeah, I think about the reproduction aspect of printmaking. I don't know if that's exactly gender, maybe that's more in like a sexuality realm, but just you know, the aspect of like bringing something into the world and then like over and over again, that like repetition and reproduction of not just like the object, but like the ideas, and then how those like travel in the world. It's like a way of like leaving a trace and leaving, I don't know, a legacy in a way that maybe I'm not going to have like biological children. Not to say that queer people don't do that, but for me, I see printmaking as a way to like take that space and yeah, and like these mentions of like archives too, and like what's left behind and like what we're leaving behind in this moment too. Again, maybe this isn't exactly gender, but that's where my mind goes in thinking about this.
Vanessa, how do you feel about the relationship of printmaking to gender?
Yeah, I got excited about this question. Well, I didn't even think about this, but I feel like zero butch in my life. But the only time people have ever been like, oh, like is in the printmaking, like teaching people how to print make, people be like, oh my God, Vanessa, you're so butch right now. And I'm like, oh my God. But I feel like my gender is always sort of like defined by searching, sort of like what is the right balance between masculine and feminine that feels good for me today. And I think how that intersects with printmaking is kind of like be the freaky weirdo you want to see in the world. And so like as a printmaker, I can like make projects to be that freaky weirdo that I want to see in the world and like sort of see what other artists have to say. Like in the Hanky project, be like, cool, like I'm so inspired by this artist Ghostness on Instagram who made this like hyena hanky thinking about like nuanced gender and femme bitch top. And I just feel like having projects that allow other artists and other printmakers to search and question, like that is sort of like just gives me sort of like more visions or like more places to explore and come closer to how I feel about my gender in this moment, because it's like always super shifting. But yeah, I think printmaking spaces, I'm like, if you build it, they will come. Be the freaky weirdo you want to see in the world. So
Yes.
I like that idea of printmaking and gender both being places where you search. One of the things that keeps me in print is that I don't ever feel like I will actually master it regardless of my title. Like there's just endless bodies of knowledge to get deeper and deeper into. And I hadn't thought about that previously as a relationship to the self and that self-exploration as well. In terms of that, I know that most of us, pardon me, have like kind of our preferred media, and I'd be interested just to go around and see what people are primarily working in, and maybe if you're vulnerable enough to share an area where you don't feel quite as confident, because we all have, you know, the strengths and the bottoms of what we do. Let's start with MC, because we know that you love relief print. Is there something else that you've been intrigued by and just haven't had a chance to try?
So I actually am really interested in merging printmaking and collage. I think it's called chincole. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but I'm really interested in the texture and how to build more texture. That's my favorite part about printmaking, is just how much like noise, how much each print can change with the pressure and everything. But a dream of mine is to become someone's litho studio buddy and just learn from a master lithographer. And I've never done anything like that. Yeah, bring me to Austin. I'll fly there once COVID's done. But I've never been able to experience that. And that's kind of my downfall of being a self-taught printmaker. I don't have access to all of those tools. So I would love to just like, you know, do all the dirty work in someone's printmaking studio and learn from people who have different techniques. And, you know, but I really want to try merging that printmaking and collage. I think it's really beautiful, and you can add a lot of really great textures, and I love paper. So if I can buy as much paper as possible, I will.
Amy, I know that your work kind of already merges printmaking with sculpture in a lot of ways. Is there a primary print medium that you're using when you do that, or is it across the board?
My expertise is in screen printing, and then to drill down further would be screen printing on fabric. So I've been doing that for a few years, and I try a lot of times to like come up with an excuse to make a lithograph or to do something, and then it's just like time-wise, it's really hard to go from screen printing to litho. It's just like such a slower process. But I am right now remotely taking a mokuhanga class for the first time, which I'm super excited about. And
could you just define mokuhanga for those who might not know?
It's like a traditional Japanese woodblock technique, and it uses watercolor as opposed to oil-based ink. And there's something about that combination of like hardness and softness in those prints that I find like super intriguing and alluring. So
fantastic. Vanessa, how about you? I know with most community shops, it's also screen printing. Is that the case as well, or have you branched out from there?
Yeah, I mean, so I specialize in screen printing for sure, but I've taken, I super love etching. I applied for a grant and went to do a month-long residency at La Ceiba Grafica in Veracruz last year. And if I could etch every day, I totally would. I think I'm sort of just like, my primary medium is drawing, and then I'm just like any printmaking medium I can get my hands on to do like applied drawing is what I feel excited about. And I've been doing a lot of screen printing with wax and like modifying my prints with gouache and doing like hand painting and wax. So I'm actually just want to learn how to do like better encaustic. And then, but I would love to take like a deeper dive with other of those super specialized nerdy etching techniques, because I love them. But I love like, you know, I'm like, I want to get into mesotin. Anyway, I love that.
Vanessa, let's party.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ruben, I saw you get so excited when they name checked etching. So let's go to you. We know you love etching. Is that the only thing you work in, or is your practice more expansive? Are there other things you think about?
I have like, I guess my secondary would be like litho, but like kind of the same as like Vanessa, like anything that like allows me to draw. Drawing's like my first like foundation baby. Like that's what I went to art school like wanting to do. I was like, I want to be a drawer. And like, that's just like, yeah, anything that allows me to kind of like do that and get into like the like nitty gritty of the details, like I nerd out about. And like, but like, there's a lot that like, I still want to learn. Like, I really want to learn letterpress. There's something like about the speed of it. And actually like as my own like personal research has like delved into archives a lot more, based on like the, you know, conversation that we all kind of had where like most of us like met each other at the beginning. And so I really want to get to like, get better at that. I do want to kind of return to screen printing. I've taken like a very long sabbatical. I had like I really loved screen print in the beginning. And then like, one time, one bad thing happened and I could not pinpoint the variable that like caused it. And then I was so like scorned and heartbroken, and I like never returned to it. And I'm like, okay, I feel like I should go on like another date with screen printing.
that's like such a shocking sentiment from an etcher, because there's so many more variables in etching.
I don't know, like, I don't know what it is about like cooking. I'm just like, whatever, it's great, it's free, it's wonderful.
Now, Mary, you were our like kind of holding screen image for the beginning of the talk with serography. So we know that's part of your wheelhouse. Is that also your main medium, or are there other things you're interested in or hoping to do?
I love screen printing, and it's kind of like my most comfortable printmaking space. And I worked at the Andy Warhol Museum for many years, and so like worked with youth programs particularly. And so I've taught a ton of people how to screen print, and I love how accessible it is, and how you don't have to have like a strong drawing hand skill in order to make like a beautiful screen print. So that's like another level of accessibility for all kinds of folks to do it. But I really loved litho when I was in school, and Artist Image Resource in Pittsburgh has litho. They have a bunch of stones if anyone's interested in coming and doing a residency there at some point. I feel like we have a lot of resource to share later on. And there's also doing like Xerox lithography, where you like rub gum arabic into a Xerox print.
Yes, I love it.
That up. I love that. I also love letterpress, and in undergrad I got super deep into that and like made a book that was screen printed and letterpressed. And I had a press for a while, but now it lives at Artist Image Resource. So it's more like in community use. And recently I got a risograph, which it's not like gonna take me away from like more like hands-on printmaking, but it's just like a different kind of tool, a different kind of beast. But it is like so fast and like so immediate, and kind of the brain space of how you set up an image is so similar to screen printing. It's like really pleasing in that way. And I don't even know if that process will ever make its way into like a printmaking conference, who knows? But that's like a new thing. And I have B Oakley, who does the gender fail stuff. I have their old reso that they were selling. So, you know, it's like this queer lineage even within this like tool that I have, this machine.
I'd like to let our audience know that we're getting close to the Q&A portion. So if you have questions, now is the time to type those into the comments. Before we get there, I just would like to go around and have everyone kind of shout out if there is a community print shop that you work at. We've all alluded to it, but we haven't gotten a lot of names, just for the benefit of the audience. So if you want to shout out your community print shop, whether it's one you work at now or one that was accessible to you in your youth, just so people who are in that areas might want to know where they can stop by, say hi, and have access. And let's start with Vanessa, because you were a founder of a community print shop. And can you give us the name of that one?
Yeah, so who knows how everything's happening in COVID, but the New Orleans Community Print Shop is still in existence, but also there's in New Orleans, you can check out Antenna Gallery has some like really cool zine stuff going on, and also Paper, oh my God, now I'm just blanking on their name. They have like a cool book, paper arts, paper making, letterpress, cool stuff going on. So check out them in New Orleans. And I'm going to scheme because I have some others in other cities, but you can come back at the end.
Fantastic. Amy, do you have any recommendations for us for community print shops?
Yes. Coming out of college, I did a keyholder program that they still do at Second State Press in Philadelphia, which was like so important for me in building printmaking community and in a new city and kind of getting my bearings, even though I had barely had time to make work at that part of my life. And now I'm on the other side of town, and I have a studio at the Philly Soapbox, which is a community print shop and zine library that specializes in letterpress and screen printing and paper making. And they're really great folks there.
Fantastic. Mary, I know you've mentioned Artist Image Resource. Are there other possibilities in your area or that you know of from your past?
Well, yeah, I guess of course, the Braddock Neighborhood Print Shop in the Braddock Library. Braddock's a borough that's technically not the city of Pittsburgh, but it is Pittsburgh. That's an amazing, magical place, and it's on the 3rd floor of like the very first Carnegie Library that Andrew Carnegie ever built, which was like made to be like more like a community center. It's like massive and has all these different rooms and like resources in it. And I don't know, I've traveled to a lot of community print shops. At one point I wanted to make like a zine that was like about community print shops in North America and have it be like an impetus to like travel and visit all the shops. With Polina Malenkin and other artists. That project never came to fruition, but maybe that's a future thing. But there's also Inkstorm Collective in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I think that's still around, and that's connected with Anchor Archive, which is like a zine librarian project. It's also called Robert Street Social Center now, and they do like zine and print oriented artist residencies, or they were, and hopefully will again. Yeah, I feel like we could build out like a long resource list, you know, like a sweet GDoc or something, maybe following up to this.
Not a bad idea. Ruben, what do you have to share with us in terms of those resources?
Yes, I just like want to totally like shout out Print League KC, and which is connected to Two Tone Press, which is a letterpress shop started by oh my god, I'm blanking on it, Michelle Dreyer and Angie Brayman. Hopefully I said that right. I feel really bad if I did. And it was also Print League KC was also co-run by also Ani Volkin, who now is in North Carolina. But Print League KC is like this really cool new community print shop that has like a litho press. They're working on getting an etching press, and then because it's connected to Two Tone, you've got like a ton of amazing like letterpress options there, and screen printing there as well. We've also got the Lawrence Art Center in Lawrence, Kansas, which is where I went to graduate school at the University of Kansas. They have a really amazing print shop, which I'm really excited to do like a project-based residency there this summer, and work in their shop. And then we also have Oddities Prints as well in Kansas City, which allows a lot of like screen printing and risograph printing publications there. A lot of really amazing stuff has happened there. Mutual aid zines, mutual aid prints have happened there. And yeah, really, really cool like connections there through like Aaron Zona, who now is at Women's Studio Workshop. My friend Kendall Harbin. Yeah, lots of really cool stuff in Kansas City, Missouri. Love it.
And MC, what do we have in Baltimore?
So I recently moved to this city. I'm still looking to explore. I found some barriers to actually getting a community print shop. Weirdly, we have a huge art school, but there's not a lot of community print shops or access in the Baltimore area. I do want to shout out Pyramid Atlantic, which is in Hyattsville, Maryland, which is closer to DC. If I had a lot of time, I would be able to go there, but I just can't, and the pandemic doesn't make it possible. But they do bookbinding, they do letterpress, screen printing, all types of printmaking. I think they do litho as well. They're a really amazing print shop, but I haven't been able to work with them in depth, but they are a really great community in the closer to DC area of Maryland. But I do know, speaking of Ghost Nest, Vanessa, Georgia is thinking about starting a community press or studio with their tattoo shop, but I'm not sure if that's happening yet. I'm working on it. I'm very inspired to make a community print shop happen here in Baltimore. It just seems a little bit tied to the academic folks who go to art school and not really for the community. So we'll build some bridges and make it happen soon here in Baltimore.
You know,
And I'm sure everybody here would be happy to pitch in whatever way we can, because we all want to just, you know, lift all the boats. We do have just 10 minutes left, a little less than 10 minutes, and there are a few questions in the chat, actually some really good questions. The first one, this is a really nice one that I think most of us can address. What advice would you give to a young queer artist who is about to graduate college and enter the big, bad world? I just want to say, first of all, that a lot of the world is big and bad, but not all of it. So I just want to qualify it that way. And who has strong feelings about that one? Amy, Ruben, I know as college educators, you probably have a lot of those types of talks with your students.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big theme that we've talked a lot about, especially in the beginning part, is like finding your community, which can be really hard to do, which also dips a little bit into the second question as well, because like it can be based on where you're located. It can be difficult. You know, and I think that's kind of the one weird thing about this pandemic is that like online connection has been a lot stronger than I feel like it was before. But yeah, don't underestimate like how generous people will be and how open people can be. And most especially within the queer community, like we're like definitely open to like just providing what we can and like any kind of support.
Amy, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's like one of my favorite things about being an artist is hanging out with other artists. And I think it's so important to kind of keep your friends close by. And I know that like sometimes when I'm feeling down or unmotivated or low energy, I'll say, hey, can we make a poster together? Or even, you know, last year in 2020, like the pandemic totally killed a lot of my energy. And I was like, you know, I want to do something for the Mid-American Print Conference, but you know, I don't know that I can do it. And I was like, hey, Ruben, do you want to do something together? And like, we got each other through that. It's like, I can't take this on right now. Can you do this part? And then I'll pick up this part. And, you know, it's, yeah. And like, I do poster collaborations and I love making the posters, but sometimes it's also just like an excuse to hang out with my friend. And I'm sure Vanessa and Mary can relate to that as well. And so, yeah, I think like having community has really gotten me through and helped to keep me engaged in the art world and all of that. And, you know, sometimes people talk about like the art world being about who you know in this really negative way. And while that can be a thing, I think there's another way to look at it of like, you know, just building relationships, building your career by building like meaningful relationships. Yeah.
Vanessa, you seemed pretty animated down there in the corner. Do you have something to chime in for our little Gaby?
Yeah, I just feel like just building off what everyone else has already said, just I think there's so many ways to sort of like figure out where you want to be, like make a zine, go to a zine fest. You'll meet people and be like, oh, I'm more drawn to these people than these people, or this is where I'm feeling better in this thing. Or like there's all these really rad residencies that are for like DIY emerging artists, like Mary mentioned, Inkstorm. Like I did a zine residency there, and it's like just like a great way to meet people and be like, oh, is this where I fit in? And like, is this like what excites me? And or like join a project. Like I feel like there's so many like portfolio exchanges you can find online just to give you a sense of like, ooh, this person's submission excites me, or like maybe I can connect with that person because like that work interests me. And I think there's so many dynamic resources within printmaking, and so just hop on in.
I'm going to move to our next question, which is kind of connected in a way. It's, I live in a small city, and I'm wondering if you have any tips on how to connect with other queer printmakers or start community building. It would be great to build relationships with other queers in a non-bar setting. And as someone who's sober, I can second that emotion. It's often so much, and I'm not trying to hate on the queer community, I love y'all, but it seems like especially media depictions of our community are very bar-centric. And so I'm always happy to connect outside of that setting. Mary, do you have any advice for that person?
Yeah, I mean, again, like inviting people in or like offering something, as other people have said, like be like, hey, let's have a drawing night, or, you know, I want to teach people how to screen print, or I want to learn how to screen print, or let's make stencils together. You know, it's like making together is like a way to like connect with people and build community that doesn't have to involve any kind of bar culture or substances. So I just like really what everyone has been saying is like really resonating, you know, like printmaking just as a medium is really really lends itself to like working together, working with other people. And so, you know, just inviting other people or applying yourself to like invite yourself into spaces through printmaking, I think is really a way to go to do that.
MC, do you have any advice for someone who's looking to meet other queer people outside of our scene, artsy queer people?
Well, so my advice comes from not from an art school or anything. I didn't really have a lot of artist friends to begin with, and I moved away from my college space where I did have more art friends into my hometown, into the suburbs. You know, my advice is really dive into some of those online communities, especially during the pandemic. That's been where I've been able to find some of the most supportive and like uplifting people who just you know, they might be struggling to create. So seeing you create like even just a little tiny stamp or like a little tiny project and doing practicing like a mini print exchange, like setting something up, it doesn't have to be so professional, right? Like I think it's easy to get wrapped up in being a professional artist, and I work full-time. Printmaking is my part-time thing, and I still like, I'm so professional when I am on a Zoom call with my friends and we're like, oh, well, we're discussing the next zine project, and like integrating ways, integrating art into different ways of activism, I think can make it really accessible and make you really passionate. Because it's like, it's one thing to me to create something because you're going to submit it somewhere, but it's another thing if it's for a reason, if it's for a cause. So mutual aid, getting involved in some of the mutual aid, transformative justice work that's going on. If there is a community fridge or a harm reduction, you know, violence prevention rally going on, offering to make prints and use your technique, your skills and what you have to better your community and uplift your community. I think that can just, it can really do wonders when you're feeling isolated, when you're feeling like no one else is doing this type of work and you don't really know where to begin. And also, you know, Instagram is very toxic, but I really love the printmaking community on Instagram. It's how I get to stay connected with everyone in this group and meet new people who are also just trying different things out. I think for me personally, showing the world my failures makes me feel a little bit better because, you know, I know other people are making failures of prints. They're not doing, they don't come out the way that they want, but like by putting it online, you're showing to your queer printmaker community, like, it's okay not to be perfect. Not everything's going to be a perfect edition. Those varied editions are just as beautiful. So that's my long-winded answer, but you know, connect with the internet, but also, you know, connect with your community and merge what passions you have with art with what passions you have in social justice or activism. Really,
yeah, that's excellent advice. We have just like 2 minutes left and one more question that I'd like to address at the very least, just a teeny bit. And this person would like to hear thoughts about the queerness of the art itself versus queer themes in art, for example, abstract queer art. Ruben, can you take just a minute to kind of address that?
Sure, yeah. This is something that I'm like, I kind of talked a little bit about queerness as like queering as like a verb, right, as an action. Yeah. So thinking about to like how the work itself like subverts, you know, an expectation. And so like, you know, the art, like you can just think of like the art of like doing something or not doing something, or like the speed at which you do something, right? Like slowness, going slow and as opposed to going like super fast about everything is like that in and of itself can be like a very queer act. Like, so, you know, versus like, you know, queer themes like in art, I think like there's a lot of people, and just to kind of like, you know, promote like gender fails like zine, you know, I know this is backwards, but I mean like just the idea that like, you know, queer art doesn't have to just be about like the depiction of like bodies. It can be like it can be like a certain action that like totally subverts it. And I think like that really allows like a more just like, I don't know, communal experience of like a work. It doesn't make it so like narrowed in on like one thing itself.
Fantastic. That is all the time we have. I'd like to thank all of you panelists for being here, for your time and insight. Thank you, PrintAustin, providing us the space to have this conversation. All y'all out there for joining us and your wonderful questions. We can all continue building community together on social media. You can find all of us there, and we look forward to seeing y'all there. Thank you so much for being here, everybody.